for Samuel 19. I looked it up again this week because I was interested. Anybody know how many chapters there are in Samuel, by the way? I didn't, off the top of my head. 31. And I thought, okay, here we are. It's funny, I'm now making myself second guess that I wasn't 30. Yeah, 31, and we're in chapter 19, and it was July 5th of last year that we started 1 Samuel. And so we are just over halfway for the first year in our book. And this isn't like Ephesians, right? We're not like dealing with like 3 or 2 words at a time in certain sermons, right? We're really trying our best to take these large chunks because it's a narrative, but it's always fascinating, right? But here's what kind of fascinated me as I rethought about this week, and I hope that you would kind of track with me on this too. For all the thousands of years that human history has been around, right? All of those years, we have had, God chose these unique moments in time to capture a sliver. That's what your life is. Your life is a sliver of time. This little dash between 2 dates, as people say, right? It's a vapor, as James would say. So you have this sliver. Well, what God did is he captured himself, what he revealed about himself in these slivers of other people's lives so that your sliver would be affected by it, right? We read about these people here. I hope you don't fall into the trap that we're just reading ancient, history and there's not, what does this matter? No. What we're actually doing is we're reading about a sliver of time. God captured a moment, in our case, in Samuel, a sliver of time with these people, so that he could reveal who he is, what he demands of people, what he demands of unbelievers and believers alike, what he has done to further and to hold on to his people, all these things, these slivers of time. And so as we live out our slivers that have been assigned to us, we're to look at these things and go, teach me. Teach me how I live in view of who you are. Teach me what you demand of me. Teach me what has been done for me in Jesus. All these are so essential. So track with me, okay, as we go through Samuel. This is not just a random history book. We're talking about these slivers of time, and that sliver informs your sliver. There's a story. I want to start with a story. There's a story that has been told about an old fishing village that was hit by a storm. I actually wrote about this story. I wrote an article for Stand to Reason about this story. This fishing village was hit by a storm, and these fishermen were not able to go out to sea and to fish. Now, these men had been all over, grown up fishing, and so through multiple generations, and they understood how to read the clouds. They understood all of these things. So these men got up in the morning, and they recognized that the clouds are in such a way that the storm is coming, and so the ocean's closed today. Sure enough, the winds came, whipped up the kind of the shorelines into whitecaps, and all the men did what they're supposed to do. They take their boats, they get them up to the higher points on the beach, kind of secure them all, and then they went and found shelter, and just annoyed that we're not working today. We're not going out. Everybody did this, right? They all saw these signs, they read them, and they recognized that, well, we're going to go find shelter, and they all complained that the ocean's closed, but we're going to wait out the storm. Except for one fisherman. One fisherman went, and he stayed by his boat, and he got his nets out, and he decided this is the perfect time to mend those nets. So he went, found all the knot by knot, had the thread in his teeth, and he was going knot by knot and finding all the tears, and he was fixing all of these tears as he was waiting out the storm. All the other fishermen are looking at him like he's a buffoon. What are you doing? Right? This is not, we're not going out into the water today. What are you doing? This guy, though, saw this opportunity, this moment, as a time to prepare. Why? Because he knew that at one point that ocean is going to be open. There's going to come a time when that storm is done. So he didn't use that time to complain or to do nothing. He used that time to prepare his nets. Now, the storm, with these 2 types of people, the storm didn't create those men to think in the way that they did. That's not what a storm does. The storm actually revealed the type of men that these guys already were. That's what a storm does. A storm brings to light what's always been there. That's what a storm does. And I think those principles go so far beyond some sort of fishing analogy, right? Two people, you know this, can experience the exact same set of circumstances, the exact situations, and come to vastly different conclusions. We know this. One person can receive correction, be confronted about a particular thing, respond in humility, grow from it, and move on. Another person can experience that same type of correction and go ballistic. How dare you say that to me? Who do you think you are? Why are you judging me this way? We've all heard these types of statements. How does that happen? One person could see somebody else's success, rejoice with them. Wow, amazing. Look what God's doing in your life. That could be true. While another one sees the same success and feels nothing but resentment. It's those dirty billionaires, you know? That's the problem with what's wrong with us. No, you're the problem. That's what the real problem is. Me and Zach have had this in business where we've had people not quite say it like that, but here's what they will say. Must be nice. Must be nice. And our response is always the same. Where were you? That's kind of our general response. Where were you on those 4 weeks of 15-hour days? Where were you at 5 a.m. for 3 weeks straight when we're working and building and growing and investing real treasure and other investment into building something? Where were you? We don't talk about that part. It's always the must be nice, as though something was handed to us. No. A person can hear the gospel, be cut to the heart, be confronted with their own sin and their estrangement from God, repent in full humility, come to Christ as God's only means of salvation, while another person can hear that exact same gospel message and walk away further hardened than when they came. Circumstances didn't change. Wasn't the evidence that certainly changed, that's for sure. But what was revealed was the heart that interpreted those circumstances. Now, I think this is exactly what's unfolding in 1 Samuel 19. And as we're going to check into this, we're just going to do a few verses today, 7 verses in fact. As we look into 1 Samuel 17, what we're going to find is this. Saul and Jonathan, they are interacting. They're seeing the exact same David. They have both witnessed everything. The same battle scene, right? From the same vantage point. They were both from the royal palace, right? They saw they heard the same songs, let's say, from the women. They saw his character. They saw how God used him. They saw all the same things. Yet Saul concludes David has to die, while Jonathan concludes that David has to be defended. The difference isn't in David. That's not the difference. No, the difference is in the condition of the heart. Now, before we jump into our actual text, I want to, every once in a while we get the option we get the opportunity to speak about doctrine, because there's an undercurrent that's happening under this text here, under really the entire text of the Bible as a whole. There's this undercurrent of a doctrine here that I want to just bring to light and just remind us. It's not going to be radically new, but it is the doctrine that I think is essential to our understanding, and that's the doctrine of total depravity. The doctrine of total depravity is essential to our thinking, and the Bible teaches it absolutely everywhere. Now, just a real quick street definition, just to make sure that we're all tracking on the same mindset here. Total depravity, my version of a definition would be because of Adam's fall, right? Genesis chapter 3. Every part of man's nature has been corrupted by sin, rendering him spiritually dead and morally unable to turn to God or believe the gospel apart from God's sovereign grace. I will say again, the scriptures, I would say the entire Bible argues this point from Genesis 3 following, but I just picked two. I picked two scriptures just to give us some evidence, and probably the more famous ones, so let me just go through really quickly. Romans 8 was the first one that came to mind. For the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it doesn't submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. Those who are in the flesh cannot please God. Now, you, as an image bearer of God, are in Adam. as a default setting, which means you are set on the flesh. That doesn't mean somebody just likes the flesh. That means you are birthed into this default position of being in the flesh, and there's no neutrality. You're not hostile to God on some times, and then other times you're for God. If you're in the flesh, you're hostile to God. That's your diagnosis in Adam. And then he goes further, for it doesn't submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. Notice what Paul did? He went from a willingness dynamic to an inability. It's not that you just don't submit to God. In other words, because if that were the case, what would the evangelist say? The evangelist would say, start submitting to God. That's what you do. Go do the thing that you're able to do. That's not what Paul says. It doesn't submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. Those who are in the flesh, in other words, in Adam, in our default human nature, cannot please God. Not that we don't, we can't. A lot of critics here. Total depravity is an essential doctrine to understanding our predicament. Because if this is true, the way I've just described it, plenty of people, by the way, I'm sure you know some, that would disagree with my assessment of what just was unpacked, right? If this is true, well, you're in a bad situation, aren't you? Something has to be done for you. Now, we have this philosophy that wants to take over here and say, but I have to do a thing. I have to do a thing. I have to take part. I have to give my permission, right? We call this free will, called a bunch of other things. I have to do a thing. Well, that's not Paul's mindset, not at all. And so if this is true, something has to be done for you. Let's do the next one, another famous one, Ephesians 2. And you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that's now at work in the sons of disobedience. Drop down to verse 4. But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead, corpses, in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ, for by grace you've been saved. Point being, something has to be done for you, external to you, right? You're the dead person. You're the spiritually dead corpse. What part or participation does a corpse play in anything? A corpse can only be a corpse. A corpse can only do its nature, which is to be dead. Something has to happen external to that corpse. And this is what we see as the analogy that Paul's giving in terms of what it means to be in Adam, what it means to be totally depraved. God has to make us alive, which is why in the Reformed circles, right? You guys are familiar with the TULIP acronym, which is why limited atonement, the L, is always such a challenging, phrase for so many people because it's not precise enough. Because it adds confusion just a tiny bit, right? I'm not a fan of that. It kind of messes up TULIP if you don't keep it, but you know what I'm saying. Because it gives the assumption or it gives the perception that God is doing his best, but he has this limited amount here of atoning work, and then therefore he gives it to, whoever gets it. But that's not true. That's not what's being discussed at all. What are we saying? This is why theologians have changed it to particular redemption. Why? Because God's always had a people. Always. That's the entire story of the Bible. He has a people, and he will save those people. In fact, he's going to make those people who are dead alive. And then if you drop down to 10, which we don't have on the board, those people who are made alive in Christ, what does he do? He makes them alive for a reason. What's the reason? For good works, which God prepared in advance that you should walk in. That's the point. Your salvation was given to you so that you could do good works that make Christ look glorious. There we go. God has always had a people, and he gives his atonement, his redemptive power is given to those people. It's always been that way because we're all totally depraved. Now, when we say total, I just want to be, again, quickly, I'm sure we've all heard at least parts of this. When we say total, what we do not mean is that every single human being is as wicked as they could possibly be. Some people think, you believe in total depravity? That's preposterous. What a dumb thing to believe. What you're saying is that people are as wicked as they could possibly be. False. I don't mean that at all. That doesn't teach that either. What does it teach? Not that people can't do more sin. Not that people couldn't do different types of sin, more harmful sin. But people not in Christ can only do sin. John Piper one time gave it, I think I heard it was on a message somewhere, and he was saying, when you have the doctrine of total depravity, and you think about an unbeliever, and let's say this unbeliever was a general contractor and it was a millionaire, and this unbeliever built a hospital wing that just did children's cancer research and made incredible progress, or built a burn ward that just helped children. The act of doing that thing would be a sin. And people go, off the charts outrageous. What a dumb thing to say. No, it's not. And here's why. The whole point of doing anything like this is to make God look glorious in it, right? Make Christ look glorious. This is the point. And what a general contractor in this analogy is doing is he's doing that thing without God in view at all. God's not even a category in his mind. So when you have an understanding of the biblical view of total depravity and what that means, it means that sin is not something we do, it's a state of being. Our secular culture is simply drowning in sin. And that's what it means to be totally depraved. It does not teach, by the way, that unbelievers can't do things that the society considers good. They do it all the time. Pats on the back all the time. What it does mean is that you and I are incapable of doing what God considers good outside of Christ's redeeming work. That's total depravity. Which is why it's so important where we start to argue, right? I kind of feel like a broken record on all these discussions, but it really matters when we want to argue with people about evidence. There's a real place for evidence, but it matters when you do it. I was at the Eagle Stop just this week, and I'm standing in line ready to check out, and there's this guy ahead of me, and kind of about halfway through their conversation, I hear the guy who's going to check out with the clerk saying, yeah, I don't believe in the way that the church teaches about Jesus. I believe in my own Jesus. He said, I believe in the historical Jesus. I don't believe in what the church teaches you about Jesus. So don't do that. That's what he was arguing for this clerk. Don't believe in the way that the church teaches. You just believe in the historical Jesus. And so I'm listening, and I'm like, okay. and then the clerk responds with, no offense, Lebanon, Missouri style argumentation about how the Bible's corrupted and all of these things. And he gave a weird argument that I'd never heard of before. And then it's, and they're just kind of like hoorah on each other, and okay. And then I get up to the counter, and I'm like, do you say something or do you not? Do you just get my little Coke and move on? But I can't not say something. And so I just said, I just want you to know that whatever I heard what that guy was saying to you, it's completely false. And then he goes, no, the Bible's not true. And I go, so you're not a Christian? No. Now, what good would it do if I was to say, well, let me give you the 12 reasons why the Bible is factual, why we have evidential, extant manuscript evidence. So we could go into all that. Does a guy like that care? Not at all. Not at all. He said, I don't believe in any of that. He actually gave an argument that said the letter J, this is the weirdest argument I've ever heard. The letter J hasn't been created until, I think he said like the 16th century. Therefore, Jesus was a fabrication. I was like, what are you? Okay. I didn't know you were a textual critic and work at, Eagle Stop. That's interesting. But the point is, I don't start there at all. You could argue for years about evidence, and there's real people out there that need to do that. But what I started with is saying, okay, but so you don't believe any of this? Oh, good. Well, then why is it wrong? First thing he brings up is, well, there's war and there's evil, so how can that be if there's a real God? I go, why is that bad at all then? What you haven't settled yet is that you're calling something evil based on what? By what standard? How can you say that anything is evil or anything is good at all? If we're all random chance, you're standing on a worldview that you cannot account for. Doesn't make any sense. So again, my role in this scenario with these people who are, again, in a total depraved state, if you understand that people are in this total depravity reality, evidence arguing isn't the first step. My first step with this guy especially was to show that their worldview was an absurdity. You're living in a worldview that doesn't make sense. You don't even live consistently with your own worldview. Let's start there. Let's go to the heart of the matter, right? More evidence for an unbeliever in their corrupt state would be completely meaningless. Real time for evidence. I'm not saying that. But everybody can look at the same evidence and can come to wildly different conclusions. Let me give you another example really quickly. Theory of evolution, right? We've all been taught at least some form of this. What does the theory of evolution say? We're all asking the fundamental question. Everybody who's ever lived on the planet's asking the same question. Where did we come from? This is what everybody's struggling through, right? An existential question. Where did we come from? Okay. Theory of evolution has an answer to that question. The Christian worldview has an answer to that question. Okay? Do you think it's an evidentiary problem? Because if it were, the proponents of evolution, certainly Darwinian evolution, it's an overwhelming case. Where did we come from? That's not an issue. This is not a lack of evidence. I'll give you one example. There's so many, and there's even whole ministries out there, I'm sure you guys are aware, that really just work at this heresy and kind of unpack it and do a bunch of different examples. Let me just show you one. The person who believes in the theory of evolution has a problem. One of the problems is what has been called the over-design problem. Has anybody ever heard of the over-design problem? Just by show of hands? Okay if you haven't. Over-design problem. This is interesting to me. The evolutionist argues, and on all this means, I'll just give a quick definition, features that go far beyond what is needed for survival. Okay, so what this means is evolutionists argue that we've all come from the same common ancestor, the ape, right, the chimpanzee, and so according to the theory of evolution, all features that have ever evolved have done so with the goal of survival. That's the point. The ones who didn't adopt those traits died off, and the ones who did continued on, right? They call it, the word I wrote down here, survival advantage. That's what it's called, the survival advantage. Okay. So what does an ape do right now? Well, they've evolved to the point of being able to find food and water. They can build basic structures like a den or something. They can fight. They can find a mate. They can reproduce, things like that. Okay. But if we've come from that, they have a greater problem. Because human beings have been over-designed to such an extent that we have skills and creativity and abilities that go far beyond survival. Here's what I found this week that I thought was really interesting. Do you know that right now you have 25 unique muscles in your face that do nothing except deal with expression? So a researcher, I actually read the report, a researcher did a study on this and found that not only do these muscles do unique things like grinning, pity, right, fear, smiling, frowning, all these things, one researcher found that there were 10,000 unique expressions from one face. Now, if you were believing in the theory of evolution, this would make no sense to you because this has nothing to do with survival. However, if you believed that you were made in the image of a God who created emotional image bearers after his own likeness, this would make a lot of sense. Here's my point, everybody's looking at the same evidence. But we all come to very, very different conclusions. And what the unbeliever needs is not more evidence. Total depravity would show that the unbeliever needs a new heart and a new mind. Because that's the only way that you're ever going to come to the spot where you believe that evidence that used to be presented to you that you thought was garbage is ever going to be valuable or viewed as a treasure. So total depravity, the only reason I wanted to take a quick little caveat on total depravity is because I think that's what's at play here in Samuel 19. Total depravity is an essential starting point to understanding what's at play. And 1 Samuel 19, I think, showcases that. We're going to get a demonstration of that from Saul directly today. What does Saul do? He looks directly at David, at God's chosen servant, David. He hears undeniable evidence everywhere, how God delivered David, right? He was there when it all happened. And he still concludes that David has to die. The problem isn't the evidence, it's the evaluation. But left to ourselves, and I think this is the main point, right? Every one of us naturally resembles Saul. Let's open up our text here. Because what we're going to see again is Jonathan, he lived the exact same thing. He responds differently. How? How does he? Why, is he just smarter? That's not it. Jonathan's heart was shaped by covenant. some action was done to Jonathan's heart, and we saw it last week, that when he first encountered David in 18, his soul was knit to David's. Something external to him happened. Let's read the text together. Here we go. We're going to start in verse 1. And Saul spoke to Jonathan, his son, and to all his servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. Now, I just want to stop there really quickly. I mean, do you hear the weight of that, by the way? This should kind of stop us in our tracks, right? Saul has now openly come to Jonathan and his whole servant class and is advocating for the murder of a citizen of Israel, of another image bearer. Now, Saul, in the previous chapters, we already saw, he kind of did the whole, deception route. Hey, let's put him in charge of a bunch of soldiers and let's go let the enemy go kill him. Well, that didn't work because David started winning every battle that he did. So let's get him now married. That'll turn his heart. Let's do this. Okay, that doesn't work. Saul tries to pin him against the wall. That doesn't work, right? Saul is trying all these other ways to have it be done, and now Saul is just throwing off everything. All disguises are thrown off, and what is he doing? It's outright calling for the murder of this man. Jealousy has progressed into open hatred. Isn't that just like sin, by the way, in our own lives? The book of James, I think Blake went through this. The book of James reminds us that evil, right, has this desire, and it conceives, and it gives birth to sin. And then eventually sin brings forth death. And Saul's illustrating that here. Has David changed? No. David's faithful, he's courageous still humble, right? Devoted to the welfare of Israel. He's putting his life on the line for Israel, right? The facts are exactly the same. Saul's interpretation has changed now. Sin is not only corrupting his actions, but it's also corrupting his perception of reality. His disease, in other words, is progressing. Let's go to verse 2. Jonathan told David, Saul, my father, seeks to kill you. Therefore, be on your guard in the morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself, and I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are. And I will speak to my father about you. And if I learn anything, I'll tell you. And Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father, and said to him, let not the king sin against his servant David, because he's not sinned against you. And because his deeds have brought good to you. For he took his life in his hand and struck down the Philistine. And the Lord worked a great salvation for all of Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. I always found that fascinating. You saw it, like you were there. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by killing David without a cause? So what does Jonathan do? Let's just track with his methodology here. He immediately warns David. That's what he did. And then he goes and courageously confronts his father, right? Who's the king, by the way. Don't miss that part. He doesn't appeal to emotion. That's not his argument. What does he do? How does he approach this? He builds a covenant case here. This is a case that he builds. You just heard it unpack. He responds through covenant. Now, I want to talk about our church for a minute. We talk about our church like the type of community that we're trying to build here, right? We've been doing this since the beginning. We want to build this type of community at this church. We've been working hard to do that very thing. But sometimes we act like it can't be broken down or it can't be taken from us. Like as long as we just stay together, listen, this system can't be broken. But this idea of a unified community of people that care about each other, it is always under attack. Always. Are you actively fighting to keep our church unified? It's a good question. We've already had examples. We've already had an example that I've had to confront personally. There will be none of that here. I will never allow a foothold of that here. That's not going to happen. Are you doing the same? We talk a lot about the community we want to build, but we have to fight to keep it. Jonathan reminds Saul here that David has never sinned against him, right? That's what he says. David repeatedly risked his own life for Israel and for Saul himself, God gave him this massive deliverance, right? All of this thing. And then Jonathan asked this devastating question that we already read. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by killing David without a cause? Jonathan comes in and he gives context, and then he reminds him of the covenantal perspective. That phrase, innocent blood, by the way, that's covenant language. But see, Jonathan's not just making a political argument. Like, that would be a stupid move politically. Why would you ever do that? That would not be expedient for your monarchy. He's not making that argument. In essence, he's arguing, do you understand what it would mean to Yahweh to shed innocent blood? As a covenantal God, do you know what that would mean? That's his argument. And what's even more remarkable about Jonathan, what I find fascinating the more we read about this together, is that it's what Jonathan is willing to lose. Like, in other words, it should be Jonathan. What David is going to take over is Jonathan's inheritance. This is his kingdom, right? Humanly speaking. David stands between Jonathan and his future throne. But what does Jonathan do? He sacrifices his inheritance for God's covenant. So what we have here, we have two men. Two men looking at the exact same David. They have the exact same information, right? They both witnessed the same exact events, and they've come to exactly opposite conclusions. How is that possible? What did Saul come to? Saul sees God's blessing on David as a threat. It has to be eliminated. So what does he start with? He starts with scheming. He starts with talking. He starts with going through these motions, and that eventually develops into outright direct action. That's how sin always works. Jonathan sees the same blessing as evidence that David should be loved, protected, and honored. Question for all of us. I think this whole point of this passage is that we would examine ourselves. Here's the question. What kind of person are you in this covenant community that God's brought us to? If we just looked at Saul and Jonathan as examples, which one are you? Because with these two men, listen, it's not just a difference in personality. Some people think, well, I'm just kind of like this. I'm just this way. This is just who I am. That's not what we're seeing. That's not it. Scripture teaches that the heart functions as the control center of the entire person. And if that's true, before a sinful action ever takes place, what do you find? A sinful heart has already taken root. The condition of the heart determines how you live in the world. Let's go to verse 6. Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan. Saul swore, "As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death." And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan reported to him all these things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as before. Now this is interesting. This is interesting. I think it shows us two things. Right off the bat, just these two verses show us two things right away. Number one, I think those convicted by the truth, generally speaking, have to stand by themselves. If you're ever full in conviction of the truth, you generally stand alone. Notice, this is back in verse 1, Saul spoke to Jonathan, his son, and to all his servants. Right? Jonathan, his son, and to all his servants that David should be killed. There's a group of people. Who stands? One man. All those other cowards, they don't stand. They don't go, why are we killing an innocent guy? Nobody does. One man. You stand for the truth, there's a strong chance you're going to stand alone. And the irony is, it's the guy who stands the most to lose. He's the one that stands. It says we can't do this. I think it shows us that. I think verses 6 and 7 also show us the power of a biblical word. You want to kill sin? You want to squash rebellion? Right? You want to maintain unity in a church body? Here's how you do it. You're going to do it with a biblical word. We don't give an ear to these types of sins. We confront sin with the Bible. Not our opinions. I don't care about your opinion. I definitely don't want you to care about my opinion. We confront sin with the Bible. We don't give an ear to these things. Jonathan, his courage was to stand alone, and it saved David's life, literally. And it brought about restoration. Now, people always respond like, but look at it, was so temporary. Look at, we already know the end of the story. We know what's going to happen. People argue like that all the time. Like, well, it didn't do any good because look at it, didn't stop anything. That's such a weird argument because that's not the point. That's not the point of this argument at all. That's not what's even being unfolded here. This is what being salt and light looks like. You stand for the truth. God's writing the narrative. You stand for the truth. You know, I read this in the beginning. This famous psalm, right? Psalm 133. Behold how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell in unity. You know what this says in Hebrew? Hine matovu manachim shevat achim gam yachad. That's how you say that in Hebrew. Hine matov umanaim. Hine, right? Same thing as Isaiah 6. Hineni, behold, right? Here am I, send me. Hineni is how you say that in Hebrew. So, same word, behold. Hine matov. Behold, what a goodness. Umanaim, and a pleasantry. But here's where it gets interesting. You can see where the English is going to do its best to translate because you can't translate literally. It says when brothers dwell in unity, but it says shevat achim, when brothers sit. Shevat achim. Then it says gam yachad, also together. Shevat achim, when brothers sit, also together. In other words, you can sit with brothers and not be together. Have you ever been around a dinner table with family? Been in a situation, I don't always want to bring up family, been in a situation where you could be at the same table, listen, and there's no unity. But hine matov, what a goodness, umanayim, what a pleasant thing, shevatachim, when brothers sit also together, gam yachad. This is the power of what it means to be unified. And listen, is that not a direct call for our church? We could all be sitting in this room and be completely disunified. It's a threat. Jonathan stood up for what was right, not because he had to know how it would go at the end. He stood up for what was right because it's right to do so. Saul swears here in our passage. Jonathan won't be killed. That David won't be killed. And David is then restored. Real healing brought about. This is why the fundamental dynamic of Christianity is not about behavior modification. It's about heart renewal. Here's the point I want to make today. The fishermen in our story, right? They reminded us that circumstances don't shape your heart. That's not the point. They reveal your heart. Circumstances do. Saul and Jonathan encountered the exact same David. Yet one of them saw David as an enemy. The other one saw David as a brother. The difference wasn't in David. That wasn't the difference. It was in their hearts. How's your heart? How's your heart today? This passage, again, brings us to examine ourselves. Examine our hearts towards each other. Your heart reveals so much more than just your personality. No, that's not it. Our greatest need is not our better circumstances, but the new heart that God gave us through Christ. And this isn't just for unbelievers. Sometimes we talk so much like this is just for unbelievers. Like, I need a new heart so that I can become a Christian. True. Does it stop there? No. No. As a Christian, if you're a Christian in this room, your heart needs to be renewed continually. Constantly brought into submission. Constantly killing sin. The condition of your heart determines how you will live, not only in this world, but in this community. How's your heart? I hope this week you think about Jonathan. I want you to think about Jonathan this week. Let me give us two, again, just, I think, pretty relatively basic application points here. Number one, practice covenant loyalty. I think this is what we see with Jonathan here in our passage today. Practice covenant loyalty. Jonathan defended David. And listen, that faithfulness cost him something precious. Huge personal cost. And God brought all of us here, every one of us, right? And we're in this thing together. Seek opportunities to protect each other. To speak truth. Nobody's saying don't do that. Do it in grace and remain faithful, even if obedience requires something of you, if it costs you something. In view of the covenant, seek to protect each other. Second one. Pursue heart transformation. And I think this is crucial for all of us. So much of the church culture that we live in today, right? We've all grown up in some form of church culture. It's largely, though, about behavior modification, right? But underneath this, there's this like whole underbelly in this church culture that is rampant with sin. Like you just do these things and you're in. Walk the aisle. We were talking about membership earlier. You know, you become a member because that's what a good Christian would do. And then you walk the aisle because that's what a good Christian would do. And and what is it? I think in the latest poll right now, Baptists getting baptized is 2.3 times in their lifetime. What a joke. What a joke, right? Just don't want that to be true of us. We have to fight to stay true. We have to fight to practice covenant loyalty. We have to constantly pursue heart transformation, constantly. Pray regularly that God would shape your desires, that He would continue to shape your affections and your understanding of His Word, so that your life increasingly reflects the new heart that He's given you in Jesus. The condition of your heart determines how you will live in the world today. We are all seeing the same stuff, but the condition of your heart is what changes things. As we take communion, as we're about to, how's your heart? We were given two men as examples here, right? Microcosms of a greater reality here. How's your heart? They both saw the same stuff and had vastly different conclusions, vastly different responses. How's your heart? And if you got heart trouble, welcome. Welcome to Christianity. We are all fellow strugglers, trying to be faithful. But it doesn't excuse it. Do work today, before communion especially. Do work, and let's pray together.